I never expected anything interesting to happen while working at a dollar store. That was kind of the appeal of it. Back in 2014, I was in a rough place financially. I had dropped out of community college halfway through my second semester because I couldn't afford both tuition and rent. I had just moved into a cheap, run-down apartment in a town called Redfield, upstate New York. It was one of those places where the air always smelled like old wood and diesel fuel, and where everyone either knew each other or didn't care enough to ask. I landed a part-time job at the local Dollar Tree a couple blocks away. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a job. Minimum wage, long hours on my feet, customers who treated me like furniture. I didn't complain. I just needed to hold on until I could save enough for something better. Most of the time, I worked the closing shift alone. It wasn't as bad as it sounds. We were open until 10 p.m., and the store was small, just 10 aisles total, a little back room for storage, and one of those sad break rooms with a microwave that made everything taste like cardboard. Evenings were usually dead after about 8:30. It gave me time to restock shelves, clean up, and then wait out the final hour at the front counter. Quiet was fine by me. But one night, I still think about it even now, years later, quiet became terrifying. It was a Thursday. I remember because it had been overcast all day and the weather was weirdly warm for October. The kind of muggy, sticky warmth that feels like it shouldn't be there, like the air itself didn't want to be touched. I was scheduled 3 p.m. to close. It had been a completely normal shift. The usual crowd came in after school. Kids buying candy, teenagers acting cool, older ladies stocking up on off-brand paper towels. By 9:30, I hadn't seen a customer in almost 20 minutes. I was sitting behind the counter playing a game on my phone. I always kept the volume low just in case someone walked in. That night, I was deep into one of those mindless time-killer games, match 3 puzzles or something. I was zoning out hard when I heard a noise, clatter. It came from somewhere in the middle of the store, loud enough to snap me out of my game. I paused, sat up straighter, and listened. It sounded like something had fallen. Maybe a plastic bin or a stack of paper plates. I looked up toward the aisles, but from the counter I couldn't see more than the first few sections. I hesitated. I wasn't scared yet, just curious. Maybe a little annoyed. Shelves were cheap and stockers didn't always line things up right. Still, I stayed put. About 3 minutes later, another sound. Thump. Louder this time. I jumped a little, staring toward the back of the store. This time it sounded heavier. I squinted, checking if anyone had walked in. The bell above the door hadn't rung. That's when it hit me. There was no one in the store. The last customer had left 10 minutes before. The front door never opened again. I would have heard it. Suddenly the quiet felt too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. I set my phone down and stood up. My sneakers squeaked slightly on the floor. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small and thin against the fluorescent lights. Nothing. No footsteps. No reply. I walked slowly toward where I thought the sound came from. Aisle 6, maybe 7. My heart was beating faster than it should have. When I turned into aisle 7, I saw it. 2 items on the floor. Aluminum foil trays and a package of holiday napkins. Not heavy things, but not the kind to fall unless someone touched them. I bent down, picked them up, and looked around. The shelves were full and neat. Nothing else looked disturbed. I placed them back, straightened a crooked row of forks, and stood there for a second. Something didn't feel right. Then, another crash, this time from the opposite end of the store. Loud. Something plastic, maybe toys. I froze. Goosebumps crawled up my arms. "Is someone in here?" I called again, louder this time. No answer. I knew I had to check. Even if it was just a kid hiding, I had to. I moved quietly toward the toy section, aisle 2. When I turned the corner, I stopped cold. There, in the middle of the aisle, was a toy truck, bright red, flipped upside down. Behind it, a stuffed unicorn had been thrown off the shelf, one of its button eyes missing. I stared at it for a long second. Then I heard something. Footsteps. Quick, light, deliberate, running. But not toward me. Away, toward the front of the store. I bolted after them, sneakers slapping against tile. When I rounded the corner, I froze again. There was a man standing behind the checkout counter. My counter. One knee up on the shelf, both hands yanking at the register. He was trying to open it. I watched, frozen, as he jerked the drawer, slammed his hand on it, then tried to lift the whole thing. "Hey, stop! I'm calling the cops!" I shouted, backing away. He didn't even flinch. He jumped down, ran to the second register, also locked. "I said I'm calling," I yelled again, fumbling for my phone. My hands were shaking. The man finally gave up. He threw something, maybe a pen, then bolted straight for the door. The bell above it rang as he yanked it open and vanished into the night. I ran to the door and locked it immediately. I didn't care that it was still 15 minutes before closing. We were done. I stood there, staring out at the dark parking lot, trying to steady my breathing. The flickering light outside illuminated just a patch of sidewalk. I couldn't see where he went. I called 911. Police arrived about 10 minutes later. I told them everything. They took notes, checked the store, asked for the camera footage. My manager followed up the next morning. The man was never found. He never came back, as far as I know. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. The worst part wasn't that he tried to rob us. It was realizing he'd been in the store the whole time. He must have been hiding somewhere, maybe crouched between shelves, maybe in the stockroom, just watching, waiting. That thought still haunts me. How close he was, how silent he stayed, and how I never knew he was there until he wanted me to. I quit a few weeks later. I told them it was because I found something closer to home, but the truth was I didn't feel safe anymore. Even now, when I walk past a Dollar Tree, even in daylight, I feel that same chill creep over me. That kind of quiet, the kind that hides something, never really leaves you. I wasn't someone who went to Dollar Tree very often. Not because I thought I was too good for it or anything like that. It just wasn't part of my usual route. But that changed after I moved. It was a few years ago, and I had just relocated to a small rental duplex on the edge of town, tucked behind a highway ramp and wedged between an old laundromat and a string of fast food joints. Rent was cheap, and so were the neighbors. The kind of people who minded their own business unless you parked in their spot. Then they'd let you know, usually with a passive-aggressive sticky note or a few choice words shouted through a window. Life was manageable. Barely. I worked long hours at a copy print shop downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me enough to keep the lights on. After work, I usually just went home, heated up leftovers, and zoned out in front of the TV until I fell asleep. That night, a Tuesday evening in February, sunset was no different, except that I'd run out of paper towels, trash bags, and basic groceries, and I was too tired to drive all the way to Walmart. That's when I decided to check out the Dollar Tree a few blocks away. It was already dark outside, not late, maybe 8:45 p.m., but the winter sky made it feel like midnight. The cold air had that dry, metallic bite to it that always comes after rain. I grabbed my hoodie, slipped my keys into my pocket, and told myself I'd be in and out in 10 minutes. The parking lot was mostly empty when I pulled in. 4, maybe 5 cars scattered across the cracked asphalt. The flickering overhead lamps buzzed faintly, casting these long, distorted shadows that made the whole place look like something out of a dream. Or a nightmare, depending on your perspective. The front sign glowed a sickly yellow-green. Dollar Tree. Everything's $1.25. I parked close to the entrance near a cart return. The air was still, heavy, and strangely quiet, like the world was holding its breath. Inside, the familiar scent hit me, a mix of cheap plastic artificial lemon cleaner and stale air. The music was faint, tinny, playing through ceiling speakers that crackled every few seconds. There was an older man at the register, flipping through a flyer, and a bored-looking teenage girl leaning against a display of Valentine's Day candy. She gave me a half-smile when I walked in, the kind you give out of politeness, not interest, and I nodded back. I grabbed a green cart. The front wheel wobbled like it was drunk, squealing every few feet. The sound echoed slightly, weirdly loud in the otherwise still store. There were maybe 3 other shoppers inside, a woman with a crying toddler near the school supplies, a guy covered in grease grabbing off-brand soda, and then her. She stood out immediately. She was tall, maybe in her late 30s, wearing a faded denim jacket and a red beanie that covered most of her dark hair. Her jeans were torn at the knees, not fashionably, but like they'd been through a lot. She was thin, almost too thin, and her eyes... Something about her eyes made me pause. They didn't just look tired. They looked hollow. At first I thought she was just another shopper wandering the aisles aimlessly. But then I noticed the way she was moving. She wasn't looking at items. She was watching people, subtly, patiently. Her gaze drifted from one person to another, staying just long enough to make you uneasy if you caught her doing it. I brushed it off, tried to mind my own business. I was exhausted, half zoning out anyway. I made my way toward the back of the store, the freezer section, to grab a frozen pizza and maybe a cheap pack of vegetables. The hum of the coolers was loud back there, a low mechanical growl that filled the silence. That's when I saw her again. She was in the next aisle over, standing perfectly still at the end of it, peering through the gap between 2 shelves. Her head tilted slightly, just enough to keep her face half hidden. I pretended not to notice and focused on the freezer door in front of me. Then I heard it, a dull thump, not the kind of noise you ignore. It came from behind me near the coolers. I turned and saw movement. At first I thought she'd dropped something, but no, she was climbing. Her hands gripped the top edge of the freezer like she was pulling herself up out of a pool. Her feet scraped against the metal racks, sending cans and boxes rolling onto the floor. The sound was surreal, loud, but hollow. "What the hell?" I whispered under my breath. She hoisted herself all the way up and disappeared into the narrow gap between the freezer and the ceiling. I could hear her shifting around up there, her boots scraping against metal. "Excuse me?" I called out, not sure why I said it. Maybe instinct, maybe disbelief. For a few seconds, silence. Then her head popped over the edge. Her eyes met mine, wide, wild, and glassy. She grinned. Just a small twitch of her mouth, but it didn't look right. It looked wrong. "What are you doing up there?" I asked, my voice shaking a little. She tilted her head, blinked once, and said softly, "Just needed a second." Her voice was raspy, the kind of voice that sounds like it's been unused for days. By now, everyone else in the store had noticed. The mom pulled her child closer. The mechanic guy leaned out from his aisle, eyes wide. Even the cashier was frozen, his mouth half open in disbelief. And then, before anyone could react, she stood up. Not crouched or balanced, stood upright on top of the freezer, facing us. Then she walked 3 or 4 quick steps and jumped. Right onto my cart. The metal frame collapsed instantly. The crash echoed through the entire store. Boxes flew, cans rolled, frozen peas burst across the floor like marbles. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my ears. "Are you serious right now?" I shouted. She didn't even flinch. She stood there amidst the wreckage, brushed off her jeans, and said with a crooked grin, "Wrong cart." That's when I knew something was seriously off. "What is wrong with you?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just turned, calm as ever, and jogged, toward the front of the store. The cashier shouted after her, "Ma'am, you can't do that." But she was already pushing through the door and out into the night. The moment she was gone, the silence came rushing back. Thick, heavy, unreal. Everyone just stared at each other. The cashier, a stocky guy with a green apron, came over to help me pick up my stuff. He was shaking his head. "She's been in here before," he said quietly. Always weird, always muttering to herself. Does she do that every time? I asked, trying to laugh, but my hands were still trembling. He sighed. Not that. That's new. I bought what I could salvage and left, trying to shake the image from my mind. Outside, the parking lot was empty again. No sign of her. No sign of anyone. I loaded my things into my car, started the engine, and sat there for a minute, headlights cutting through the mist. For a moment, I thought I saw movement near the edge of the lot, but when I blinked, it was gone. I told myself I was imagining things. I drove to the gas station nearby to fill up before heading home. As I walked inside to grab a drink, I froze. Standing near the beer fridge, rifling through her pockets, hair sticking out from under that red beanie, was her. She looked up briefly, muttered something under her breath, and went back to rummaging. I didn't say a word. I backed out slowly and left. My heart didn't stop racing until I was halfway home. But the night wasn't over yet. 5 minutes later, I hit a police roadblock. Flashing lights, spike strips, the works. An officer motioned for me to pull over, so I did. I watched, confused, as several police cars suddenly sped past me, sirens blaring. Then a silver sedan flew by in the opposite lane, swerving wildly. It was her. Even through the windshield, I saw that red beanie. She was gripping the wheel, hair whipping around her face, eyes wide and wild. The cops reacted fast. The sedan hit the spike strip, tires shredded, and the car skidded off the road into a shallow ditch. They swarmed her immediately. She fought at first, screaming, clawing, kicking, but they got her under control. Her beanie fell off and her tangled hair spilled over her face as they cuffed her. The whole thing lasted maybe a minute. I drove home in stunned silence. 2 days later, I saw the story on the local news. Her name was Angela Ditt, 39 years old. Multiple warrants, petty theft, assault, breaking and entering. She'd escaped from a psychiatric facility 2 towns over, had been missing for almost a month. They believed she'd been squatting in abandoned houses, living out of her car, and hitting random stores for supplies. That night at Dollar Tree was supposed to be just another one of her errands. They said she wasn't dangerous, just unstable. But I know what I saw in her eyes that night. It wasn't just madness. It was emptiness, like a void behind her gaze. And when she said wrong cart, it didn't sound like a joke. It sounded like she was looking for something, or someone, and I wasn't it. I still go to Dollar Tree sometimes, but never at night. And every time I pass by the freezer aisle, I can't help but glance up, just for a second, at that narrow space between the freezer and the ceiling. Because in the back of my mind, I still half expect to see a red beanie peeking over the edge, watching. I've worked at Dollar Tree for almost 4 years. I've seen people steal, argue, threaten, and once even try to return used candles. But nothing, and I mean nothing, ever scared me like what happened one November night last year. It was a Tuesday. We were closing at 10 p.m., same as always. I'd pulled the short straw, which meant I was on closing duty, sweeping, restocking, locking up. It wasn't bad, usually. Quiet, peaceful even. The aisles always looked kind of eerie when they were empty. Bright fluorescent light, faint hum of the refrigerators, the smell of old plastic and mop water. That night, though, something just felt off from the start. My coworker Denise was supposed to stay until close, but she left early. Said she had a weird feeling and didn't want to drive home late. I laughed it off, told her I'd be fine. I'd closed plenty of nights alone. By 9:30 p.m., the store was dead. Not a single customer. I went through the usual routine, cleaned the counter, took the trash out back, and started counting the register. The old radio we kept behind the counter was playing static again, so I turned it off. The silence felt heavy. Too heavy. At 9:47, the door jingled. I looked up, annoyed mostly. We close at 10 sharp, and the last thing I wanted was a customer rushing in right before lockup. He walked in slow. A tall man, maybe mid-40s, wearing a gray hoodie, dark jeans, and a black baseball cap pulled low. His face was shadowed. Not that it mattered, because something about him immediately made my stomach tighten. "Hey there," I said, trying to sound normal. "Just so you know, we're closing in about 10 minutes. He didn't answer, didn't even nod, just kept walking down the first aisle, hands in his pockets. I figured maybe he was one of those quiet types, the kind that hate small talk. Fine, whatever. But then I noticed something strange. He wasn't picking anything up. He wasn't even looking at the shelves. He was just walking, slowly, methodically, up one aisle, down the next, like he was counting them. Every time he reached the end of an aisle, he'd stop, turn his head toward me, and just stand there for a few seconds before moving on. I tried to ignore it, but the longer it went on, the worse it felt. My heart was beating faster, and I could feel the sweat building on my palms. By 9:55, I decided enough was enough. "Sir?" I called out. He didn't respond. "Sir, we're closing in 5 minutes." This time he stopped, mid-step, and slowly turned his head toward me. And I swear to God, his mouth curled into the smallest smile I've ever seen. Then he said in this low, gravelly voice, "I know." That's it. Just that. I know. I felt a chill crawl up my neck. He turned back and walked toward the rear of the store, the stockroom door. Now, customers aren't allowed back there. There's a sign that says "Employees Only" in bold red letters. I started walking after him. "Sir, that area's restricted." But by the time I reached the end of the aisle, he was gone. Gone. The door to the stockroom was closed. And the thing is, I keep that door locked. Always. The only key was on the lanyard around my neck. I just stood there staring. My hands were shaking. I pulled out my phone, thinking about calling the manager or maybe even the police. But then I heard it. A sound from inside the stockroom. Soft, rhythmic. It was the sound of something tapping. It wasn't random. It was steady, deliberate. I grabbed a broom handle because what else are you supposed to do, right? My brain was screaming at me to just leave, but something made me push open that door anyway. The lights in the stockroom were flickering, half the bulbs out, boxes stacked high, shelves of cleaning supplies, the faint hum of the back freezer. No one there, but the tapping continued. Coming from the far corner, near the old storage cage we never used. I walked closer, my footsteps echoing against the concrete, and then I saw it. The man was crouched inside the cage, knees bent, head tilted down, tapping the floor with his fingernail. I froze. He looked up, and this time I saw his face clearly. Pale, eyes too wide, smile too big. There was something wrong with the way his mouth moved, like the muscles weren't connected right. "What are you doing?" I demanded. My voice cracked. He stopped tapping, tilted his head. Then in that same gravelly whisper, he said, "Just looking for the basement." "We don't have a basement," I said. He smiled wider. "You do." Then, before I could react, he stood up and slammed the cage door shut between us. I stumbled back, dropped the broom. "Sir, you need to leave right now." He didn't move, just stood there in the shadows grinning. And then, out of nowhere, he started humming. A low, tuneless hum. It made my skin crawl. I bolted, ran back to the front, grabbed the phone and dialed 911, told them there was a trespasser in the store. The dispatcher said officers were on their way. But when I turned around to check the back again, the stockroom door was open. The humming was gone. By the time the cops arrived, the place was empty. We searched the store top to bottom. Nothing. Not a single sign anyone had been there. The cage door was still closed, but there were fresh fingerprints on the metal. And on the floor beneath it, 3 small scratches, like fingernail marks. They checked the cameras the next day. The footage showed me sweeping, restocking, counting the register, all normal. Then at 9:47, the door chimed. I looked up, said something. But the camera, it didn't capture anyone walking in. No man, no hoodie, nothing. It was just me, talking to empty air. The manager thought I'd imagined it. The cops shrugged it off. Stress, they said. Working alone too much, maybe paranoia. But here's the thing. 2 weeks later, the new cashier, Alyssa, had to close by herself. She quit after that night, wouldn't tell us why, wouldn't even come back to pick up her last paycheck. All she said before she left was this: "Don't work the closing shift, especially not if someone comes in after 9:47. Even now, if you stand in the back stockroom when it's quiet, you can still hear it, like fingernails against concrete. Looking for a basement that isn't supposed to exist."